Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we would be learning about methods of payment involved in international trade finance. I have already uploaded few more videos which is related to trade finance playlist. So I request you to please go through all those videos for a concept clarity. You can get the link to the playlist on the I button in the description of this video as well as at the end of this video. Now let's start with this one. So starting with the introduction, payment terms are the condition that importer and exporter in international trade agree on to complete transaction. Okay, we have read this sentence. Now let's try to understand it. Importer and exporter. Let's take a normal market condition. What happens? There is a buyer, there is a seller, and exchange of good or service is happening between the buyer and the seller. When the buyer will be buying the good or taking any service, in return he or she will be making the payment. Now what happens? That payment could be made instant through any of the payment methods like cash or UPI, or that payment can be made after few days. Maybe the seller has sold the goods on credit basis. So after few days the buyer will be making the payment. So these can be two forms of payment. We are just taking a simple example of any market where there is a buyer and there is a seller. Now apply the same concept when it comes to international trade finance. What is the major difference? The buyer, which is also known as the importer, the seller, which is also known as the exporter, is located in two different countries. Now, because they are located in two different countries, the risk involved is more. There is more insecurities and trust issues. So to avoid all those things, they have to agree on they have to agree on certain things, right? In which one of the most important thing is how the payment will be made. Okay, so in this video, we will be focusing upon what all are the payment methods involved in international trade finance, how importer can make payment to exporter, what all things they can agree upon, right? Okay, so let's see. Payment terms deal with many important issues relating to trade, like whether payment will be made before delivery, who retains ownership of goods before delivery, how payment will be made. Buyer ideally want to make payment when they receive goods and seller want to collect payment before they send the goods. Now let's talk about two ideal condition. What happens that whenever I am referring to seller, I am referring to the exporter because we are talking about trade transaction, international trade. Whenever I am referring to buyer, I am referring to importer. Okay, so make this thing a little clear in your mind. What happens? So we were talking about two ideal condition. What will buyer want? Buyer want that he receives the good. After that, he or she will be making the payment before he want to receive the goods, right? So the goods should come first and the payment later on buyer will be making. This is the ideal condition for the buyer. Why? Because the good is with him and after that he can make the payment after checking the goods, that whether the goods are proper or not, whether he has received the value for the money or not, and after that he can decide whether to make payment or not. So this is a totally ideal condition for buyer. But is it the ideal condition for seller? No, because seller has shipped the goods and after that buyer is making the payment. What if buyer refuses to make the payment? What if buyer says that the goods are not proper, however the goods shipped were in proper condition? There can be n number of reasons for which there can be complications in the transaction. So huge risk is involved on the seller side when we talk about receiving the payment first and after that receiving the goods first by the buyer, after that making the payment. Again, vice versa, what would be the ideal condition for the seller? That he receives the payment first, after that he'll be shipping the goods because anyways money is with him, so it's secure now. After that he can ship the goods. So there are two ideal conditions in which the other party is at huge risk exposure. How to come to mediation? How to choose the payment method where both the parties can be satisfied, or should there be some methods which can bring uniformity on both the sides? So let's focus on this and understand how this was inculcated. Hence, this becomes important for both seller and buyer to agree on payment terms that can be balancing for both. Now, let's have a look at our three major ways of payment methods in international trade. So, first one is clean payments. Whenever we are referring to clean payment, we are talking about two types: advance payment and open account. Second one is documentary collection method. So again, here are two types: documents against acceptance and documents against payment. We will be reading about all this in the coming slides. And the third type is documentary credit, which is more popularly known as letter of credit. Okay. Let's move and see what is clean payment. So in clean payment transaction, all shipping documents including title documents are handled directly by the trading parties. Now when I'll be making my next video, I'll be explaining it in more clear way that what all are the trade documents. For example, I'm giving you just a brief idea so that whenever I'm telling that word, you can get an instant idea in your mind. So what all could be trade documents? There can be invoice. What is invoice? Which is a bill raised by the seller to the buyer because he is shipping some goods. So as a normal market condition, also a bill is given to you and then you make the payment. In the same way, an invoice is raised on the name of the buyer and he will be making the payment. Just giving a clean example, right? So there will be invoices involved. There will be transport documents. Now, because goods are being shipped, goods will be being shipped either by seaway. So in that case, there will be bill of lading generated that the goods has been shipped, has been loaded and transported. So a document which is a proof that the goods has been loaded and transported. Bill of lading in case the goods are being transported through ship. If it is being transported through airway means there is airway bill raised. In simple way, you try to understand that there is transport documents involved, which is a proof that the goods has been shipped. There is invoices involved, which is a proof that the payment has to be made. Again, there is shipping documents involved. Okay, as such, there is packing list involved. Packing list means packing list will be defining that what all goods are there, description of the goods, how many quantity is there. All these things are called trade documents. I'll be explaining this in a particular video, which will be my next video. Trade documents involved in this international trade finance. There it will be more clear. I've just given you a brief idea that what all could be trade documents. So here it is saying that in clean payment transaction, these trade documents are not handled by bank. It is handled by the parties involved. Who are the parties? The buyer and the seller. They themselves will be handling the documents. The role of bank is limited to clearing fund. What will be the role of bank? Only that customer is having account with the bank. So customer will be asking, the buyer will be asking that please make the payment on the seller's name and bank will be facilitating that payment. So that is the only role of the bank. Bank is not handling any document. Bank is not making any inspection of the documents. There are two types of clean payment. We already referred advance payment and open account. Now just understand that when I'm talking about advance payment and open account, a few minutes back I told you that there are two ideal conditions. One ideal condition for the buyer and one ideal condition for the seller. And in both the case, there is risk involved on the other party and that is huge. So, we are referring to the same ideal conditions in terms of these two payments, advance payment and open account. Let's see how. So, what happens in advance payment? It is an arrangement whereby the exporter is trusted to ship the goods after receiving payment from the importer. Who is the exporter? He is seller. Who is importer? He is buyer. Now, seller is trusted to ship the goods after receiving the payment. So, who is on the benefit side? Obviously, the seller is on the beneficial side because he is receiving the goods. He is receiving the payment and after that he is shipping the goods to the buyer. So, the seller has already got the money in his pockets. After that, he is sending the goods to the buyer. Risk is on the buyer, that the buyer has already made the payment, buyer has made the advance payment, and now he will be receiving the goods, whether the goods will be in proper condition or not, whether the goods is in proper quantity that was demanded or not, how was the so there can be n number of conditions, as I said, which can be of risk to the buyer. After that, if he wants to return the good because it is not as per the agreement, so what all could be the risk on the buyer side? All these things. But what is happening in advance payment? Seller is receiving the payment. After that, seller is shipping the goods to the buyer. Risk is on buyer side, benefit is on seller side. Buyer pays for the goods upfront before shipment. High risk on importer and no risk on exporter. Importer is buyer, exporter is seller. There is high risk on buyer because he has already made the payment. After that, he will be receiving the goods. And see, we are talking about international trade transaction. So, when the goods will be coming, it will be taking a lot of days. It will be involving a lot of days. There will be a risk that in between the transportation, the goods may be damaged also. Who will bear that risk? Who will bear that loss? So there can be, as I said, there can be many risk exposure when it comes to international trade transaction, and thus it becomes more cautious to handle these transactions in a proper way. So in this case, there is high risk on buyer and there is no risk on seller. But why would someone want to get into such agreement where there is so much risk on buyer and no risk on seller? See, this is prevalent nowadays also. But what happens? This is prevalent only between those parties who have a lot of trust between them. Like the buyer have lot of trust on the seller, and thus he is ready to make the payment. The seller is having a good reputation in the market, so the buyer is not in a mood to make any negotiation in payment terms, and he is ready to make the payment. After that, he will be getting the goods. So there is trust which is available between the buyer and seller because of long-term relation, because of market reputation, etc. conditions. Okay, so this is advance payment. Totally opposite to advance payment is open account. In open account, huge risk is on seller or the exporter and no risk is on buyer or the importer. So let's see, it is an arrangement whereby the importer is trusted to pay the export after receipt of the goods. Buyer pays for the goods after receiving the shipment. So what was happening in advance payment? Buyer has made the payment and after that the goods was shipped by the seller. Here, buyer is paying for the goods after receiving the shipment. So seller has shipped the goods, buyer has received the goods, and after that he is making the payment. So who is on the riskier side? Now the seller is on the riskier side and buyer is not at any risk because anyways he will be making the payment after getting the goods. So he can check the goods, he can be assured that whatever he has get is up to the quality, up to the demand, and then he can make the payment. If there is anything other than that, he can directly contact the seller and ask that these were the conditions which are not fulfilled and hence I'll be not making the full payment or whatever the reason. So buyer is not at the risk, seller is on the risk. Seller is on the risk that he has already made the shipment of the goods. Now what if buyer refuses to make the payment or buyer refuses to make full payment or buyer says that the goods were not in proper condition. However, from seller side, he believes that the good was sent properly and everything. So there can be confusions and chaos between buyer and seller. But again, why this transaction is still happening? Buyer is having a good reputation in the market. Here, there is again trust between the seller and the buyer, maybe a long-term relation between buyer and seller, and thus they are ready to make transactions because they know, because of the past record, they believe that anything will not go wrong. And because of some mutual understanding and relation and good reputation in the market, they comes to this agreement to avoid any involvement of bank in terms of document handling and all these things. So let's see, high risk on exporter and no risk on importer. Now coming to our second method. This one is the most popular method and most adopted method by the buyer and the seller involved in trade transactions, which is called as documentary collection. Documentary collection method. This is a method of payment used in international trade whereby the exporter entrusts the handling of commercial and financial document to bank and gives the bank instruction concerning the release of these documents. Okay, now don't focus on these sentence and all. First listen to me carefully and you will understand how this is different from clean payment. So when we talked about clean payment, there was buyer and seller and they were handling the documents by themselves. Bank role was only to release the payment. But here, the bank as an intermediator is performing a more strong role. The bank is handling the documents. And because of this, when I said that the trust issues are there between the seller and buyer because they are located in different countries and there is risk involved, now, because of the presence of the bank in this whole picture, this becomes a little more clear. The process becomes a little more relevant. So try to understand this. See, there is a seller. Okay, seller located in one country, there is buyer located in another country. Now what happens under documentary collection method? Seller shipped the goods. Okay, seller has shipped the goods and all the documents that were generated, what all are those documents? When the seller is shipping the goods, there will be transport document which will be a proof that the goods has been shipped from either through sea or through airway, whatever it is. There will be transport document which will be giving a proof that the goods has been shipped through this transportation mode. Then there will be an invoice. Invoice will be there which will be telling the amount, that how much amount is, how much payment has to be collected from the buyer. So there will be an invoice raised. Then there will be this packing list which will be showing what all is the quantity of good, the description of the goods. I gave you such examples. So in short, these are the trade documents. Then there is also one certificate of origin which shows that from which country the good is coming, where it is going, right? Which is the destination country and which is the country from where the goods are loaded. Port of loading and port of destination. I'll be making it all clear in next video, but till now understand that after shipping the goods, seller has shipped the goods. After that, all these documents are generated with the seller as in the exporter. Now, seller will be giving all these documents to the bank. Where is this bank located? This is located in the exporter's country only, or we can say it is an exporter's bank or seller's bank. So, seller will be giving all these documents to the bank, which is the seller's bank. Seller's bank will be handling those documents and making a covering schedule according to seller's instruction. What instructions can seller give? Seller can give instruction that this is the payment amount that need to be collected from the buyer. These all are the goods that are being shipped to the buyer. So there will be certain instructions given. According to that instructions, the documents will be handled, the covering will be made by the seller's bank, and then those documents will be provided to the importer's bank or the buyer's bank. Again, I am repeating the process. Seller has shipped the goods. Seller has raised all these documents, which is the trade documents, including transportation document, invoices, etc., packing list, etc. Then seller has given all these documents to the seller's bank, to the bank. Now, seller's bank has made a covering as per seller's instruction that what all things need to be complied by the buyer. After making all those covering and handling all those documents properly, the seller's bank will be giving those documents to the buyer's bank, which is located in another country. So now the buyer's bank, as per the covering made, as per the instructions given by the seller, will be collecting the payment from the buyer, right? After collecting the payment from the buyer's bank will release those documents. What is the role of these documents over there? Only once the buyer will be able to show that documents, he will be able to get the goods or release the goods from the custom clearance. So see how the whole process is working. Now there is seller's bank involved. Now there is buyer's bank involved. Other than buyer and seller, now there is bank involved, which is acting as an intermediary. What is bank doing? They are they are handling the documents and giving instruction which is given by the seller, like how the payment need to be collected by the buyer. Once the buyer has made the payment, the documents is released by the buyer's bank to the buyer, and the buyer will be showing those documents and get the goods from the custom clearance. Then the payment that the buyer has made to his or her bank, which is the buyer's bank, that payment will come to the seller's bank, and the seller's bank will be giving that payment to the seller. So this is the whole cycle working. I'll be showing you this whole cycle in another video of documentary collection where I'll be explaining. But for now, I think verbally also I have made it clear how the whole process is working. Again, if you want, I can repeat it once more. There is seller, there is seller's bank, there is buyer, there is buyer's bank. Just keeping it a simple transaction, not involving more parties and other banks in the same picture. Just giving you an example. So seller has shipped the goods and presented the document to the seller's bank. The seller's bank has handled all the documents, made the covering according to seller's instruction and given those documents to the buyer's bank. Buyer's bank again inspect the documents and see what all instructions has been given by the seller. If the instructions are complied by the buyer will be making the payment, and then the buyer's bank will be giving the document to the buyer. Buyer will take the document and go to custom clearance and get the goods. The payment that has been made by the buyer will be again given by buyer's bank to the seller's bank, and seller's bank will be giving the payment back to the seller. So this is how the whole cycle under documentary collection is working. Now these collection of documents, that what all documents should be there, how many Xerox copies are required, how many original documents are required, what all are mandatory documents, and what all things need to be inspected by the bank. These all collection of documents are subject to URC, which is Uniform Rules for Collection, published by ICC. This is referred by all the banks or financial institutions involved in this transaction. According to those rules and guidelines, they check the documents and follow the procedure. Now, under this also there are two types: documents against payment and documents against acceptance. So what happens in documents against payment? We were talking about that buyer made the payment. After that, the documents was given by buyer's bank to the buyer. So that was documents against payment. Why? Because instantly the payment was made by the buyer. As soon as the documents was, as soon as the goods were there in the destination country, in the importer's country, and the importer or buyer went to his bank and collected the documents and made the payment right there. Okay, instantly the payment was made. So documents against payment means the documents were collected by the buyer against payment, against instant payment, which is also called at sight. Okay. Second is documents against acceptance. Okay, let me just show you so that you can correlate, which is also called usance payment. Document against payment is called at sight payment. Document against acceptance is called at usance. It is not complicated. We talked about market and a buyer and a seller involved. What was happening? Buyer was making the payment either through cash instantly, or buyer was making payment after few days on credit period. Same is happening. When we are talking about document against payment, it means the buyer is making payment instantly and collecting the document. But document against acceptance, there is credit period involved. So buyer will be making payment after certain days and will be collecting the documents right then. But will be giving a promise that after these number of days, I will be making the payment. And again, as soon as the payment will be made, the same cycle will be followed. So what is major difference? Let's understand through these sentences. In this term, the document under consignment are delivered to importer only after collecting payment of good by buyer's bank. So, okay, after collecting the payment of goods, the consignment documents are delivered to the importer. Once importer has made the payment, then only the buyer's bank will be giving the documents. Before that, the buyer's bank is instructed to not release the document to the importer. The exporter ships the goods and submits pertaining document to importer's bank with the instruction to discharge documents to the importer against payment. But what is happening in document against acceptance? Under document against acceptance, the exporter allows credit to the importer. So a credit period is given. The period of credit is referred to as usance or usance period. The importer is required to accept the bill. The importer will be signing the acceptance of the bill that I have accepted. I want the documents to release my goods, but I will be making payment after certain days. So he is making a promise to pay at a certain date in future. Once bill is signed by the importer can take the documents and clear his goods. So this is how documentary collection method is working. Now let's come to our last method, which is a more reliable method. As we are moving forward towards more proper method of involved in trade transaction, a more secure or reliable method. So first one was claim payments, after that documentary collection. Now comes documentary credit, which is also known as letter of credit. Okay, so understand this process of letter of credit. Now, the buyer is the applicant, the seller is the beneficiary. I am using two terms. The buyer is the applicant, the seller is the beneficiary. What will buyer do? Buyer will go to bank and will ask the bank to issue a LC, which is letter of credit. Why will buyer do this? Buyer will say that seller is not able to trust me, that I'll be making the payment, so you please come into our transaction, play a significant role of issuing a letter of credit, which is giving credit worthiness of the buyer, that the buyer will be making the payment. The bank is assuring the seller that buyer will be making the payment. If the buyer will not be making the payment, I will pay on behalf of the buyer before the due date, on the due date. Okay. So let's understand process of letter of credit. Now, buyer is the applicant, seller is the beneficiary. There are two terms, buyer being applicant, seller being beneficiary. Why beneficiary? Because seller will be getting the payment. Why applicant? Because buyer is the one who will requesting for payment for letter of credit to the bank. So buyer will go to his or her bank in this country. So for example, buyer is of India and there is a bank called State Bank of India, SBI. So buyer will go to SBI and will ask to issue LC, letter of credit, which will be giving all the details about the seller, that where is the seller located, which is the what goods is being shipped by the seller, what is the agreed payment amount between the buyer and the seller. So all these details will be given by the buyer to the issuing bank as in the buyer's bank, that will be issuing LC, letter of credit, on behalf of the buyer. Letter of credit is working as a credit worthiness by the bank. Bank is saying, see, you are located in another country, the seller is located in another country, but my buyer, why are you not ready to make the transaction? So I am here, please trust me, I am a bank holding a good position in the country. I am issuing this LC, which is credit worthy, which is letter of credit showing credit worthiness of the buyer. If the buyer is not making the payment, I'll be making payment on behalf of the buyer on the given due date. Okay, so bank is standing strong in between the parties. So once buyer has given all the proper instructions to the buyer's bank or the issuing bank and has requested to issue LC, if bank is okay with all the details that is given by the buyer regarding the goods, that the goods are okay, the payment amount, the seller that is involved, the country from where the goods are being shipped, all those things, all those conditions, if there is nothing ambiguous, if there is nothing which is against rules, the issuing bank will agree to issue the LC or letter of credit. That letter of credit will go to the seller's bank, which will be performing as an advising bank. When we are talking about letter of credit transaction, the seller's bank will be working as advising bank. So the seller's bank will again take that LC and will check all the terms and condition. Now the beneficiary or the seller which is involved over there, the seller's bank will be showing the LC and the documents to the seller that these are all the terms and conditions. This LC is presented by the buyer's bank. After that, the seller will be sending the goods, shipping the goods, and the payment will be made by the buyer on the due date. So this is how letter of credit is involved in this process. The bank is there which is ready to take the responsibility of the credit worthiness, of giving credit worthiness to the buyer. Okay. So these are all the three payment methods that are involved in trade transactions. If you want, you can ask me in comment for any particular payment method. I know I have not used flowcharts to explain in this. It was just a simple brief explanation about all the payment methods. If you want me to make a particular video on any of these payment methods explaining you with the process flowchart, please ask me in comments. I'll be ready to make such videos on it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was useful. Thank you.